Well, we're back after a short 18-month hiatus. Frost Christman is back with its fourth episode, I think. Oh, shit. All right.
Really?
Wow, more than I thought. Number seven. Lucky number 7.
Yep.
We're talking today about a couple of recent films that deal with the legacy of communism as a broad concept through the lens of historical reenactment and dramatization.
In cinema.
Cinema.
We see films.
Yes, absolutely.
We don't see movies, we see films.
No. In fact, the first one we're going to be talking about was in 4 languages, something like that.
Far too many.
A ton.
That's my main complaint.
So
too much globalism in this.
it was pretty. I mean, it was a pretty blatant bit of literally culture. This was actually cultural Marxism. If you want to wonder what the hell people talk about, it's mostly an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. But you watch the film we're talking about today, and it's literal cultural Marxism. The film being Raul Peck's The Young Karl Marx, which is a genuinely perverse film because it situates the budding bromance between Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels and their specific romances. Karl with his wife, Jenny Westphalen, and Engels with the firebrand Irish factory worker Mary Burns and her sister.
Yeah,
that's how he.
That was only alluded to.
Yeah, well,
also Lynch and the maid was just kind of mentioned.
Yeah. She's just sort of sitting there. She's a little Chekhov's gun for the sequel.
That's the thing, though, is that we were talking about this was for the real Marx heads.
Oh yeah, there's all these little things in the movie that you're not going to get unless you have read at least one terrible Marx biography, and without them, they just are sort of things that happen. But yeah, one of them is the maid, who if you know about Marx, that when they move to London, he's gonna knock up and then have Engels take credit for the paternity of the kid.
Yeah,
that actually probably would have been a funnier movie. Actually, what we mostly spent talking about this movie is just how many other more interesting slices of life they could have chosen.
Oh my God, they really picked boring shit. I was kind of thinking it would be kind of soap opera-y.
Yeah.
And they would focus on, maid and partying and maid impregnation, partying, affairs with sisters and whatnot. No.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that they took this thing, the emergence of Marxism as an ideology in the conversations and actions of these two men, and put it in the most bourgeois artistic framework possible, which is the gray-looking, middle-brow BBC-style adaptation. Mm-hmm. Like Middlemarch or something. It
was very difficult to watch them trying to create tension and indicate the passage of time with orchestral music over someone scribbling.
Yeah, there's a lot of montages of people writing things.
Yeah, but the thing is, they did do cool things, and not just it didn't have to be like sensationalist or sexed up or anything. I mean, there was a few, kind of Benny Hill moments where he's running from creditors.
They run from the creditors. They run from the police at one point. They get kicked out of Paris. So there is there are action moments broadly construed. It actually
there's
opens.
Titties.
There's some boobs. It opens with an actual action scene because the beginning of the movie is when Marx is at the first newspaper that he sort of helped co-found and write for that was shut down by Prussian authorities, when he stood up in inflammatory fashion for the peasants who were being persecuted for collecting dead wood on noble lands. And he tells this, over him reading the article is images of these put-upon peasants having their heads caved in by the local constabulary on horseback.
For picking up sticks.
For picking up sticks, yes. And that's sort of like the primal scene of injustice that sort of generates all of the thinking on how to solve these horrible social inequalities and injustices. So it starts off with the first scene is him getting yelled at by his editors for writing the thing, and it kind of feels like they're going, Marx, you've gone too far this time. Your renegade ways are going to get us all in trouble with the mayor. Turn in your quill. And
but
he's
McGarnagle
like,
gets results.
Yeah, fuck you, buddy. I do what I want. And then he just yells at these guys about how they're a bunch of dumbasses and they don't have any good theories and they're just talking vague bullshit, which is very true to life. And one thing that the movie gets very much right is that it's largely Marx criticizing and insulting other socialists.
Yeah.
For not having a theory, not being smart enough, just basically being a bunch of sort of addle-pated do-gooders.
Also, he fat shamed.
Yes.
They left out that specifically, but then another moment for the real motherfucking Marx heads out there is like they introduced Proudhon.
Yes.
Who was very much a moralist.
Yes.
Moralist anarchist.
Yeah.
And the thing is, he was so nice.
He was adorable. He meets Proudhon. Proudhon is very nice to him. First thing he does is heckle him. His first encounter with Proudhon is heckling him from the audience of a speech. But then they meet him, and he's nice to him.
So nice.
They interact, and then it's one of those things where if you know your Marx, you're sort of watching it like, oh, hell no. There's a scene where he gives Marx and Engels copies of his book, the Philosophy of Poverty. And they're like, I hope you enjoy it. And you're like, oh, hell no. Because the real Marx heads know that they wrote a scathing denunciation of the thing that Marx, in typical dickhead fashion, called the poverty of philosophy. And the next scene is them hawking it at a labor meeting. So, yeah, he's just mean to this nice guy.
Who is very wrong.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Totally wrong.
Is that the one?
And he was fat.
Yeah, and the thing you get, though, through the whole thing of him being pricks to everybody is that it's true. Everybody who he's criticizing, and the entire kind of concept of socialism as it was burbling up in the ferment of the Industrial Revolution of the mid-1900s was very much formless. It was basically, this is not right and it should be different. And Marx's clarion call throughout the entire movie to everyone who he sees and yells at and insults is, that's not good enough. There needs to be a theory behind it. And we need to focus on articulating it in a way that people can understand. And people get very mad at him throughout the course of the film, but at every turn they're just like, damn it, Marx, I'm so mad at you, but you get results.
Yeah.
That pamphlet was so goddamn good, we just have to keep you into this organization.
The man could write a pamphlet. I did think one of the strong things about it is that it dealt with the fundamental antagonism between Marxism and anarchism being a kind of sense of communal brotherhood, and Marxism recognizing that no, there is a capitalist class that by its very nature is in direct conflict with the working classes. And he pushed back against the all men are brothers thing.
Yeah.
Which was like extremely, I mean, there was this super kind of churchy move towards, a fellowship of poverty and sort of liberal values or whatever. And Marx and Engels too were pretty upfront about the fact that it's like, no, they don't want to be your friends.
Yeah.
They want to exploit your labor.
Yeah, there's an irresolvable conflict of interest between classes that can't be resolved through any other form than the overthrow of class as a concept. And that's what he's talking about the whole movie, and everyone's getting their feelings hurt. Multiple scenes of him yelling at people and then them storming out of the room, but then him writing something that everyone just has to agree is too good not to recognize.
It's too damn good.
So the real through line of the film from a character perspective, to sort of fill out all of the yelling, is the budding friendship between Marx and Engels. And they have a classic meet cute at the beginning where they meet in Paris and their first words are sort of like, hey, fuck you, buddy, you're being a rude dickhead. That's, Engels says that, and he's like, dude, sorry, but, I'm strutting right here. I can't hear you. But one thing that was very credible is that they basically cement their friendship by complimenting each other's writing.
Yeah.
Like they sit down.
Well, and it was such a fucking corny movie moment too, where he was like, I've read your book. You want to know what I think? Yeah. I think it was amazing.
Yeah, that was it. That's it. Yeah, because it starts.
The condition of the working class in England is one of the greatest books on the subject.
Yeah, because they start off, they're yelling, they're kind of like snipping at each other in a sort of a parlor way. Then they sit down and have a drink, and Engels just gushes all over Marx, but in a very restrained German way. It just says, you're a genius. This work is brilliant. You're the greatest social scientist of your era. And then Marx goes, you know what I think of your book? You want me to be honest? And then there's a nice pause. And he's like, it's genius.
By the way, I just want to say I looked it up and I messed it up. he didn't call Proudhon fat. He called him all kinds of other things.
Yeah.
He called Bakunin a monster, a huge mass of flesh and fat, and is barely capable of walking anymore. To crown it all, he is sexually perverse and jealous of the 17-year-old Polish girl who married him in Siberia because of his martyrdom. He is presently in Sweden, where he is hatching revolution with the Finns. Which, hatching revolution with the Finns is also an insult. Like, it's included as being, like, he put, like, revolution was sarcastic in that.
Good luck getting the Finns to do anything.
Marx was a hard hater, is what we're trying to get at.
Big time. And, but it was, they cast the guys who played Proudhon and Bakunin were not very large, so that wouldn't have worked. He couldn't.
They were
have done
not
it in the movie.
sloppy, amphibious-looking people as Bakunin and Proudhon were. They also had one of the best characters,
Weitling?
Yeah, it was Weitling.
Weitling. Yeah, he was another guy who was a competing voice in socialism, and he would give these huge stem-winding speeches to big crowds of workers, and they would all love them. But
he was an
totally
insane person and deserves his own biopic.
Yeah.
Because he was a complete psychopath. He also apparently invented a machine that did button sewing or whatever.
Yeah.
Like he was definitely a practical human being. He was also actually poor.
Yeah.
And grew up in horrible destitution. And he was sort of a preacher for the working class, but also just a wild, unpredictable idiot.
Yeah. And according to this film, Marx literally ran him out of the socialist movement just by owning him in a meeting.
Yeah.
He just yells at him and says, "You don't have any theory. You don't have anything besides your piety, you dumbass," and he just leaves.
He was
and he's not seen for
pious.
again in the rest.
Yeah, he was super pious, and he was definitely annoying. And they did a really good job at playing him as a subtle, like a zealot and like a street preacher, but also extremely cool character from history.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, all those early socialists were very fascinating characters.
I think he was a Fourierist.
Yeah,
one of those doofuses.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the big. The Fourier was one of the big currents that Marx had to sort of push against, and that was all based on sentiment. Yeah.
Fourier said he was an extreme logic guy. He said, they're like, how will garbage pickup be handled under socialism when it's a job that no one wants to do under his kind of weird agrarian socialism? And he says, let little boys do it. They're filthy. Just let children do it. It's fine. They love it. They fucking love it.
They love garbage.
He also said that everyone, I think, there would be a social prostitution class that would. He said, I think he said,
Pepe's on your side if you brought that out now.
A special group of, he said, particularly amorous and benevolent individuals. So
the
it
girlfriend
was
battalion.
UBI, but for sex.
Yeah, you just got all the Pepes on your side. Now. Alt-right has just all switched to Fourierist socialism.
Yeah.
So
I can deal with that better.
So after they're friends, after they become friends, they go out drinking, and they're talk late into the night, and then in the funniest scene in the movie, they're puking in an alley.
Yeah.
And while they're puking in the alley, Marx formulates his 11th thesis on Feuerbach, where in between blorks, he goes, Engels, in the history of philosophy, they've sought to understand the world. But
what
if they changed it? And
then it's he broke the fourth wall, and they both looked at the camera and grinned and put on sunglasses, and it was ting.
Yeah, and there are moments strewn throughout that sort of wink at Marx's classic Marx quotes, but that is the most blatant one.
Yeah,
that's the sort of the funniest moment where they just really break it.
That's when they're playing to the cheap seats.
Oh yeah.
Which we appreciated in our own dumb delight.
Yeah,
the way
funny.
We appreciated Proudhon handing the book and being I can't wait to hear what you have to think about.
Yeah, we were like, oh hell no, when he said that. We're like, we know what he's gonna think. He's not gonna like it.
He doesn't
Poor guy.
like it.
Poor guy.
And
his nice chin strap beard. He's about to get owned so badly. Poor guy. So and then the movie splits between Marx being poor as hell, dodging creditors in Paris, and then Brussels after he gets kicked out of Paris, and then Engels working for his dickhead father at their Manchester factory, and falling for Mary Burns and basically putting up with the needs of being a bourgeois piece of shit in order to sort of fund the lifestyle of Marx.
He even literally said, like, I don't think this is right. And Marx was like, no. Let's slow down here.
Yeah.
No clean hands in a dirty world, buddy. How else are you going to fund...
Yes. In fact, that's a moment from their life story that isn't in the film, but is more sort of the most curb your enthusiasm moment in the history of the Marx-Engels friendship, because for a long time they mostly corresponded through letters. They didn't see each other very often because he was in Manchester and Marx was on the continent or in London, and a lot of their letters are him asking for money. And there is a scene in the movie where creditors are literally at the door yelling at Jenny Marx, and Marx shows up with a bunch of lobsters and money for them, and it's all came from a money order from Engels. But years later, after the course of this film, Mary Burns, his live-in lover, who we meet in the film, died. And Engels wrote a letter to Marx telling him how sad he was and how wrecked he felt that she was dead. And Marx responded with a letter that said, I'm very sorry to hear that. By the way, if you could send me some more money, that'd be really great. And that's the one time in their correspondence where Engels is palpably angry at him.
Yeah.
In the letter that he responds to, where he says, you are cold and unfeeling, and to think that all of you can manage to worry about is this money when my love of my life is dead. But they patched it up. But that was Marx at his most Larry David.
Well, and it was kind of, I mean, it is... Marx really did have, like, no fucking money.
He did have no money.
So there was, I mean...
He didn't have any pirate treasure, according to some insane conspiracy theories that some people think are mind-blowing.
He had pirate treasure?
There's this idiot thing that literally comes from, like, the John Birch Society in the 50s.
Oh, hell yeah.
This theory that Marx got a bunch of slave-based pirate treasure from Jean Lafitte's family to help fund the Communist Manifesto.
Those famous communist partisans, the privateers.
Yeah. But still, no, he was poor the whole time, and he really depended on Engels. And you see the beginning of that relationship.
Yeah.
But it's
Engels did have a pretty good life.
He did. Yeah.
He was also like very like, I mean, he was much more bourgeois than Marx, not just in sort of the money sense, but in terms of values. He had like the free love thing, huge partier. I think his son-in-law or somebody, I can't remember how many kids Engels fathered, but they referred to him as the great beheader of champagne bottles.
He was bottles and models, baby.
Yeah.
Marx was much more staid. He was much more classic.
Marx was
middle
a family
class,
man.
Classic middle class, family man, knock up the maid.
The maid, yeah.
That is, he really was sort of the picture of a 19th century gentleman in that way, whereas Engels much more had the sort of bohemian style of I live with two Irish sisters. I do what I want. I'm not marrying anybody.
Yeah.
Just having kids.
I think he did he refer to Mary Burns as his wife?
He did, but I don't think they were ever actually married.
I don't think they were actually
married. He
married.
would say it to sort of not scandalize people, but they never actually got married. She didn't believe in marriage either, so she was a radical in her own
they
right.
included she didn't believe it. I am glad they included Mary Burns and Jenny Marx, and I'm very kind of anti the sort of revisionist herstory stuff. I think Mary Beard has the correct line about this, where she said, there were no Amazons, there was no matriarchy. That in itself is a male fantasy. However, Jenny Marx and Mary Beard were incredibly influential to the history of socialist thought to communism.
Yeah.
I mean, like... I don't even. They did make a few jokes where like no one could read Marx's handwriting.
Yes, he lost jobs. He tried to get jobs with the railroad,
like the
post office,
and they're like, we can't.
And he couldn't
read your
get the gig because
yeah.
nobody could read his goddamn scribbles.
So, like, literally in an administrative capacity, Jenny Marx was incredibly important, and as a labor activist, Mary Burns was incredibly important.
Yes, and there's
as a thinker.
Yes, and they have that moment. That's another sort of comedic high point where they're on the beach. And they're talking, and Jenny and Mary are watching as Marx and Engels are sort of struggling,
growing out.
Whether there's sort of, it seems, I don't know how true this is, but I think they invented this for drama. It's like 48. It's like beginning of 1848, and they've Marx and Engels have basically wrested control of what was called the League of the Just, or Justice League, as we called it.
We call it Justice League.
And turned it into the
We're
Communist
funny.
League. And were now tasked with writing a short pamphlet for workers that laid out their program. And Marx is having a crisis of faith. Yeah, a manifesto, if you will. And Marx is having a crisis of faith where he's like, I'm tired. I don't know what else to do.
Yeah. He can't pay bills.
And Engels says, we've got to continue. You have to keep doing it.
We got a communist.
Yeah, we got a communist
harder than we've ever communisted before.
But while they're having this conversation, Mary and Jenny are sitting on the beach, this hellish windswept English beach.
Yeah, one of these like horrible, shitty Northern European beaches where they're like, "Let's go on holiday."
Yeah. Let's all wear 5 layers of clothing and sit on
freezing wind, sand whipped into our face for a lovely beachside holiday.
Sit on these awfully uncomfortable chairs next to flapping tents and get grit in our faces. And they're talking about family, and Mary Burns just says, yeah, I don't want to have kids. We're making sure of not having kids. And Jenny's like, really? You don't want kids? And then Mary says, yeah, if he wants kids, he can have them with my sister. She's dying for it.
Yeah.
And she can almost see sort of the invisible monocle drop out of Jenny's eye.
Yeah.
So it is so it's basically them fighting for control, becoming friends, fighting for control of these communist groups, yelling at all of the bad, dumb socialists, and then culminating with them deciding we're going to write the Communist Manifesto. And along the way, you see them writing several different things and having little mini montages of them writing.
Yeah.
They're like the candles burning down, and they're sleeping on the desk, and they're pacing back and forth. Classic stuff.
Yeah.
So that's such as it is, that's the arc. It's not very dramatic. It's almost perversely anti-dramatic.
It was some weird choices because they weren't dramatic moments. Or particularly salacious moments. There's a few there's a few allusions to it. We were both sort of confused as to why they picked the moments they did, but I don't know. I did enjoy it.
I think what I think it was I think that I honestly think that this is a movie that is sort of like The Big Short in that it wanted to be didactic. And to be didactic and to teach the audience something, it wanted to package it in a cinematic form that they recognize, so that the lesson stuff sort of goes by without being too difficult to digest. And this is classic period drama, people in drawing rooms and all that stuff. And so along the way, the real point, I think, of the movie is the moments where they stop to sort of explain specific elements of Marxist theory in the context of these dramatic moments.
Yeah.
Like when they go to a fancy club in London that Engels is a member of, and they run into a factory worker or a factory owner.
This was actually pretty good.
Yeah. Like that's it's a good way of explaining like the concept of exploitation of labor.
Right. Well, and in the confrontation, which I'm sure never happened, he asked him, like, how many children do you have working in your factory? And I thought what was good about that is that he was in no way defensive about it. He's like, oh, about half.
Yeah.
And they're like, mornings, nights? He's like, oh, both.
Yeah.
And it was like, he gave sort of at some point they pushed him into a justification. It was a little, I call it exploitation.
Yeah.
But I think it is sort of important to be like, just so you know, people were definitely employing children and not even seeking to justify it because they were just like, oh, well, we're giving them jobs.
Yeah, if they're not there to do it, it's not going to get done.
And if it doesn't get done, we have no economy, and then we're much worse off.
And the key moment in that for me, in terms of because it's incredibly easy. Dickens did it all the time to just show how awful exploitation was at that time, and how unjust it was. But the other thing was to say what the mechanism of it is, and that's where this differs from any kind of like an Oliver Twist adaptation or something, is that Marx at the end of the scene says, oh, so this isn't to have an economy, this isn't to make sure things are produced, this is to make sure that you have profit.
Yeah.
You are superfluous to this process. These people's misery is so that you can, without working, gain money.
Right.
And that's the driving force of the class conflict that is irresolvable, and the exploitation and misery that accompanies class conflict. And that is the essential Marxist insight that I think the movie is trying to sort of show the birth of in the way these guys talk about it.
It does seem like there were two audiences that they kind of had in mind. One was the person that's like, oh, Marx, communism, I kind of know about that. And then for those people, the most didactic moment would be that moment where he's confronting the capitalist factory owner. And then there's a leftist audience. Because Raul Peck is like Minister of Culture of Haiti.
Yes.
Which, like, cool, but also weird, but also, a country with, let's say a Marxist history.
Yeah.
To put it lightly. And for leftists, I think the most interesting scene would be when they go into the Justice League Friends meeting, and there are these kind of liberal, kind of humanist type leanings that a lot of the crowd has. They go from this all men are brothers to workers of the world unite or something like that.
That was it. They literally, and it's very good visual filmmaking. When they come in, there's a banner on the wall that says "All men are brothers." Shit banner. Terrible, very boring banner. Very brown. Poorly done, brown, monochrome. And then Engels goes up and gives a speech. He reads some of Marx, of course. And then by the end of it, they've carried the day.
Take down the banner.
They've won the vote. They take down that stupid banner and put up a big, bright red one that says
Excellent
"Workers
banner.
of all
Beautiful.
worlds,
It's
of all
gold.
lands unite."
It's beautiful.
Gorgeous. Yes.
We're gonna make communism great again.
Yeah, and that is that switch from the slogan "All men are brothers" to "Workers of the world unite" is a perfect capsule explanation of the change in the socialist movement before and after Marx showed up.
Yeah,
because it really was a movement of basically
it was religious people.
It was a religious moral sentiment.
Yeah.
To a actual analysis of economic conditions and what they create, and then how to deal with those actual on the ground material realities.
Yeah, and an understanding of the vehicles that would lead us to an egalitarian society, and this is a often misused word, but like praxis. Like, okay, this does have to be a workers' movement.
Yes.
So I think it was kind of two audiences, and then I guess to some degree it was just for like history buffs too. Which for history buffs, I think you'll find some embellishments, but it's fun. Yeah,
and hey, there's Bakunin, hey, there's Proudhon. Those are fun moments.
Yeah,
it is what it is. It's a very odd choice. The ending is very anticlimactic. They've decided they resolve on the beach to write the Communist Manifesto. Yeah. Then they show them read. There's a voiceover of the Communist Manifesto over pictures of workers, and then it just fades out. And then there's a title card saying, "Oh, and a month later, the revolutions of 1848 happened."
And then the closing title.
And then they cut to the credits, and the song is "Like a Rolling Stone" by Bob Dylan.
Which feels like there's like a placeholder. Like sometimes you're watching a movie. Like remember when we were watching the last Marvel movie and they were talking about the boxes?
Yeah, Justice League.
Yeah, and
the League of the Just.
The League of the Just. And they it was like they called it just like the box, and they were like, okay, we're gonna highlight this. Remember to write something later.
We're gonna not call it the box.
But
it would be stupid if a 3-hour.
We will come back to this.
It would be stupid if this $100 billion movie revolved around something we just called the box. At least in the Marvel movies.
The mother box. Yeah.
At least in the Marvel movies, it's called the Tesseract, which sounds vaguely sciencey.
Right. So I think the way they were going to close it, they were like, they had like a little card that said, "Put ending here." And then they played some Bob Dylan for some reason to make it seem contemporary, which I don't think needed to happen. Yeah. I do think that kind of spoon feeds people when they're like, okay, we're going to add one contemporary pop song at the end.
They want to be like, this is still relevant to you. Although, if it was, you really wanted it to be relevant to people, wouldn't it be Kanye or something? I mean, Bob Dylan is like 50 years old.
I think they also could have, I mean, if they really wanted to do it, they could just show like workers now. They could just show like Bangladeshi garment workers or like, like a
greeter at Walmart.
Yeah.
In a one of those slave shrimp boats in the Southeast Asia.
You could show tomato pickers in fucking Florida.
Anything. But if you really want to break through the sort of the period, you got to do something. You had to be a little more bold than they were willing to be. Yeah. Picking Bob Dylan is it's the lowest effort attempt to try to contemporize that you could have.
I think as far as movies goes, history buffs will like it. it would be good for libs, and it's fun but easy for leftists.
Yeah, because there are moments where you're like, oh, I know what's happening now. This is going to be bad.
I know this part.
I will say it's a little disingenuous in the closing credits because they sort of imply that the Communist Manifesto was the spark that caused the 1848 revolution.
Yeah.
It's not true at all.
There was a whole bunch of Yeah.
But I would
But I do think it was worth, and they mentioned this a few times, is that the whole of Europe was in a massive upheaval at the time.
Oh, yeah.
And the way they discussed it, they really thought, and you'll see this multiple times in history. You saw it in the 60s, you saw it to a lesser degree during Occupy, is that people are like, oh, everything's happening all at once. The whole world is churning. Something's going to happen. And then...
And Marx was one of them. Marx was absolutely convinced that 48 was going to be the end of capitalism. And then when it didn't happen, then the next economic downturn, which was the real precipitant cause of the 1848 revolutions. The next time there was a depression, it was going to be that time.
Yeah.
And it took him a while, and that's really when that didn't happen is when he starts writing Capital.
Yeah.
He's like, okay, we're in this for the long haul.
Yeah.
We need a much more comprehensive understanding of what this mechanism is called capitalism if we're going to deal with it, because the big push, the big collapse is not on the cards. But in 48, they thought it was going to be. So the one thing to end this discussion of the movie, I guess... The thing I was thinking watching the movie is, what other movie about a time in Marx's life would you like to see instead of this weird period when they're just writing and hiding from butchers?
I think it would have been I could have been like a all one day movie of the coup at Justice League. At the Justice League Friends.
We were talking about how that would be interesting.
That would be the most interesting thing, I think, for a leftist.
Yeah, if it was just about the factional maneuvering that went into taking over the Justice League.
It would be a highly political,
and turning into the Communist League.
Actually, you know who would be good at directing that? Armando Iannucci.
That's true.
Because it's about the office politics of real politics.
And the other ones I thought would be interesting is Young Marx. Go take that title seriously. Go really Young Marx. Go when he was basically John Belushi in Animal House at the University of Bonn.
Yeah.
Because his first college stint was at the University of Bonn, where he was forced to leave. His dad made him go to Berlin because he was only drinking and dueling and shooting out streetlights with blunderbusses.
He was just knockout gaming.
Yeah,
he was
just
wilding
a movie
out.
where Marx is just a shithead college student. That would have been kind of funny. But the other
Marx
one,
screaming food fight.
Yes. But then it ends with him like running into Hegel and just is like, oh shit, whoa. And the other one would be the other one would be on the other side of this period they chose, which would be the one time that Marx actually was in the middle of revolutionary ferment was during the 1848 revolutions. Right after the movie ends, he went back from Brussels to Germany, to Cologne, Germany, which was in ferment and in rebellion against Prussian rule, and he started a new newspaper with a bunch of other radicals. Engels actually went down to where there was street fighting, fought on the barricades. He actually got kicked off the barricades because the barricades had German flags up, and he went out by himself without anybody's authorization and replaced them with red flags and the red flag of social revolution.
That would be so cinematic.
And then they're like, dude, you're freaking out the squares. You're freaking out the liberals, because it was the 48 revolution was at that point an alliance between workers and libs. And then the libs were freaked out by the red flag, and he just goes there and puts it up, and they're like, get the hell
That would
on.
be an amazing cinematic
And then
moment,
there was an actual set piece battle between these southern German revolutionaries and the Prussian army. And my guy, the guy I talked about my first Drunk History episode, August Willich, commanded a unit fighting the Prussian army, and Engels was his adjutant. He was his first and his second in command. So like you would have had actual action involved, which would have been cool. But I think the budget issues would have been constraining in that case.
Well, that's just why we need a planned economy that can make many Marx movies.
Yes, exactly. Take all the money that went into the Transformers films and make them about
make
Marx.
like 8 good Marx movies
Absolutely.
for one Transformers budget.
Yes. Or one insane Marx movie that cost $1 billion.
Marx and Engels
Marx.
combine to make a...
They turn into a communist Voltron that shoots lasers at Bakunin.
Proton is Mothra. Bakunin is he's Gamera, friend of the children.
Yeah. He was shaped like Gamera, actually.
He was.
Okay, so that was from one end of the emergence of socialism and communist thought to another. The other movie we're talking about today is the film that is just in theaters here in New York after having run in England last year, Armando Iannucci's The Death of Stalin.
So before we go into this, I do want to say that it is worth talking about the actual legacy of Soviet and communist and socialist states. So I do want to actually read this thing from an economist, Branko Milanovic. He's most famous for something called the elephant graph. He talks about growth and inequality, and I think he's a very interesting economist. He also might be the most romantically minded economist I've ever, which is not, saying much, but he wrote something in a blog post where he mostly writes about global inequality and growth. But if you want to look it up, Branko Milanovic, it's called How I Lost My Past, and it was right after Brexit and Trump, and I just want to read a little bit. By the way, he grew up in Yugoslavia. In almost all recent literature that analyzes Brexit and Trump entry, there is a constant theme of a fall from the heady days at the end of the Cold War, of pining for a time when unstoppable victory of democracy and neoliberal economics was a certainty, and liberal capitalism stood at the pinnacle of human achievement. Such narratives always filled me with discomfort. It is in part because I never believed in them, and because my personal experience was quite different. Rather than believing in the end of history, I saw the end of the Cold War as an ambivalent event. Good for many people because it brought them national liberation, the promise of better living standards, but traumatic for others because it brought them the rise of vicious nationalism, wars, unemployment, and disastrous declines in income. I know that I was influenced in that by a very clear realization that once the Berlin Wall fell, the civil war in Yugoslavia was inevitable. I still remember a rather somber dinner that I shared with my mother on that day in November. And by firsthand experience of sudden misery that befell Russia in the early 1990s when I traveled there working for the World Bank. So I was aware that my discomfort with triumphalism could be explained by these two rarely found together circumstances. It was perhaps an idiosyncratic comfort. But reading other books, and especially highly acclaimed Tony Judt, I realized that the discomfort went further. The deluge of literature that was written or published after the end of the Cold War, I just could not find almost anything that mirrored my own experiences from the Yugoslavia of the 60s and 70s. However hard I tried, I could not see anything in my memories that had to deal with collectivization, killings, political trials, endless breadlines, imprisoned thinkers, and other stories that are currently published in literary magazine. It is even stranger because I was very politically precocious. Without exaggeration, I think I was more politically minded than 99% of my peers in the then Yugoslavia. But my memories of the 1960s and 70s are different. I remember long dinners discussing politics, women, and nations, long summer vacations, foreign travel, language subsets, whole-night concerts, epic soccer games, girls in miniskirts, the smell of the new apartment in which my family moved, excitement of new books and of buying my favorite weekly on the evening before the day when it would hit the stands. I cannot find any of that in Jude's, Svetlana Alexievich, or any other writer. I know that some of the memories may be influenced by nostalgia, but as hard as I try, I still find them as my dominant memories. I remember too many details of each of them to believe that my nostalgia is somehow fabricated. I cannot say they did not happen. So I think The Death of Stalin portrayed a sort of moment in time. It's a slapstick comedy. I don't want you to think that any of us are... I don't know what you would call it, like these deranged Shachtmanite revisionists or whatever. I think the decline of Soviet and communist states was a net negative for the world. However, this was like a really great movie, and there was some horrible brutality in the Soviet Union, and I think Iannucci did a great job of portraying that with comedy.
Yes. It's really interesting because it's the same sort of insight that he has brought to all of his stuff about politics but before now, which is that in the real crucible of power, the only people who really thrive are entirely cynical or completely weak. Mm-hmm. Anybody with any kind of moral fortitude or principles or anything is going to get pulped out sooner or later, leaving just people who will go along to get along out of fear or out of self-interest. And in his other films and TV shows, the stakes are a lot lower.
Mm-hmm.
Like the worst thing that's going to happen to somebody in the thick of it or in the loop or whatever, or Veep, they might get humiliated publicly and they might have to take a private sector job, you know. Whereas here he's taking that same insight into the inner workings of Stalin's Presidium, where if you fuck up, you will fucking get killed.
Yeah.
And all of these guys have survived 20 years under Stalin, and as such are anybody who had any real principles has gotten sort of ground out of the system by then, and all you had left are survivors. And when he dies, they set about trying to overthrow one another and gain any kind of advantage in the system that is now bereft of sort of the figure that had held it together that whole time. But that gives, so it has his comedy, but it's much darker than his other movies because the stakes are so much higher.
I would say to go into it knowing that it's not about politics, it's about office politics.
Yeah.
So please don't like, that's not what really happened. It's a fucking slapstick comedy.
Yeah.
If you don't enjoy this, you're not a leftist. You're just a boring asshole.
Yeah, it's very amusing. The caricatures of the different leaders are very interesting.
Oh my god, it's great.
All the
stylistic
performances
choices
are really good.
were
Yeah.
absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
So, like, one of the things we're talking about were like the accents that they used. They didn't try and make everyone speak in a Russian accent. I think one person, like a Russian pianist, has a Russian accent.
And she's actually Russian.
Jeffrey Tambor talks like Jeffrey Tambor.
Yep.
Steve Buscemi has that like little quick talk in New York accent.
Yeah.
I think the only person who actually like puts on an accent is Jason Isaacs, who's actually from the north of England, but goes for a different north of England. He does a Yorkshire accent
as Zhukov.
Zhukov.
Yeah. And
it's fucking hilarious.
It's very funny, and it's pretty much. I mean, you could kind of say.
I got
He's
the
the
entire
jock.
Red Army.
The idea, I mean, you could sort of see the parochial British mindset behind that choice is that these guys are all a bunch of pencil necks, and Zhukov's an actual soldier. He's like a jock amongst a bunch
An
of
absolute jock,
you know, teachers' pets. You know, these guys were all
He's a
kissing
man of
Stalin's
action.
ass in an office when he was, you know, rolling into Berlin. So he's sort of the alpha dude. So he's got the most virile British accent there is, which is the northern one. Because the northerners are the real men of England.
Pretty much.
So that's why he sort of bursts in, and he sort of has to have that.
The cape.
And he's got this just comically huge array of medals on his chest.
The comedy in it is almost like harkens back to another era. It's very which way did he go kind of stuff.
Yeah. Like there's a scene where Stalin dies in there.
Keep avoiding the piss.
Yeah. Yes. He's like he dies in his own or he collapses in his own urine in his office, and everybody comes one after the other. All the members of the Presidium come to kneel by him reverently, and one by one they find out that there's piss there. And
fake their panic too, and they're grieving and mourning when actually they're feeling nothing but terror.
Yeah. It's very fascinating because they're all thrilled secretly at the prospect of him being dead and maybe rising in a position or taking power, but also terrified that he'd get better.
Yeah. And also at the very like some of them really did want a more liberal, shall we say, Soviet Union, a less authoritarian. So they're like, this could signify regime change. There was, I think there was legitimate desire for that in his cabinet.
Yeah.
But also people were power hungry. They were petty.
Yeah, I think that's the main. It is a very cynical film, like all of the Iannucci stuff, and it really doesn't have a lot insightful to say other than people, as they get closer to power, they get less human, essentially.
Yeah.
Because even when people are wanting to liberalize, if you're a communist and you think it's bad that they liberalize, or you are, a lib or anti-authoritarian, whatever that means, and you think it's good that they did. Either way, it's not presented as them doing it out of principle. They're doing it because they think that will have them a stronger public position to vis-a-vis their rivals. I mean, the guy,
the main sort of vector for that is Beria, who was the most repulsive, violent, exploitative.
Beria was the single worst figure of Stalin's entire reign. He was,
absolutely.
and this is really I was surprised at how explicit they were about this in an ostensible comedy. Is the movie makes pains to point out that he was a serial rapist.
Yes.
He would basically select women at random in Moscow and then have the NKVD bring them to him.
Yeah.
And they show that several times, that process of that happening in the movie. And he is just a grotesquely monstrous figure. But also, after Stalin died, a point man in wanting to liberalize things.
But specifically so that it would endear him to the people.
Exactly, yes. And it's so the movie radically contracts the time frame of the struggle between Beria and Khrushchev and those guys. It all happens basically within 2 or 3 days of Stalin's death. In real life, it was the better part of the year 1953, from Stalin's death in March until the spoiler alert, but come on, Beria's execution in December. And there was a period that there was actually a several-month period where there was sort of a triumvirate with Beria and Georgy Malenkov, played hilariously by Jeffrey Tambor, as just
he does an amazing job
as the other sort of person. You have a genuine monster like Beria, and then Steve Buscemi plays Khrushchev as not necessarily an evil person, but a very self-centered,
a practical-minded person, but not no like streak of sadism.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Not a sadist, but certainly not anyone with any kind of real values.
Yeah.
Just somebody who is in proximity of power and wants more of it. So it's sort of you get the sliding scale, and on one end you have the absolute monster in Beria, and then you have the less sadistic but still hard-nosed cynic in Khrushchev, and then Malenkov, who is who's survived basically by not having a spine or a will or anything that would even make him a threat to Stalin, even in any kind of plausible sense.
They have these jokes where, like, Steve Buscemi goes home and reads everything he said to Stalin to his wife, and she takes notes. He's like, he didn't laugh at this joke. He did laugh at this joke, and she's like, no more Navy jokes.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Jeffrey Tambor's Malenkov will just blunderingly say, "Hey, what happened to that guy?" during a conversation with Stalin.
Kind of guileless.
And it's like, dude, we all know what happened to that guy. But he's never really in danger because he's just not a threat to anyone on Earth.
He's pretty hapless.
But so Beria sort of propped him up for several months in mid-1953 before he was overthrown, and on a platform of liberalization. In fact, some sources claim that Beria was actually looking to basically be the Soviet Union's Yeltsin in the 50s, in that he was willing to basically end the Cold War and undivide Germany in exchange for American aid. So he would have been like the hero of the 20th century, according to American narratives of the Soviet Union, and he was.
Well, like
without question,
says,
the most
like, history is written by the winners, and he would have been,
the most monstrous person who ever had a position of power in the Soviet Union. But we would have loved him if he'd done that. He would have been Time Magazine's Man of the Year for decades to come. But he got owned by Khrushchev. Spoiler alert.
Owned super hard.
But yeah, it's very funny. I wouldn't say that I would want to change anybody in it, but I enjoyed Buscemi's Khrushchev, but it really just. It pained me seeing it, knowing that there's another movie that was apparently supposed to be made on HBO. I just remember reading about it years ago. It was going to be based on a book called K Blows Top, which was a historical nonfiction book that recounted Khrushchev's trip to the United States in the 50s. He did a cross-country tour of the United States that was a huge deal. And culminated with him in Los Angeles, and he requested to go to Disneyland, and they refused because they couldn't accommodate the security that would have been required to have him go while there were, however many people visiting it. And he flipped out, and he started screaming, and there was a headline of a newspaper that said K blows top, and it was about him losing his shit because he didn't go to Disneyland. And this movie got optioned by HBO, and it was going to have Paul Giamatti as Khrushchev.
Oh, my God.
And when I heard that, the idea of Paul Giamatti as Khrushchev, it has haunted me ever since as the most perfect casting on earth, because I love Buscemi in this movie, but he is very sharp. He's angular. You don't buy that he's fat, even though they kind of put padding on him. He's got like
they
gave him a pug nose prosthesis that's not very convincing. And I just... Khrushchev was a round boy.
He's a round boy.
Love
treats.
He was a round treat boy, holding up the corn the corn cob, and I would have wanted. I mean, imagine Giamatti yelling, "We will bury you," with a fucking shoe in his hand.
Yeah,
it's too perfect. It has to happen. So somebody in Hollywood make something where Giamatti gets to be fucking Khrushchev.
Okay, that does need to happen, but I gotta say one of the highlights for this movie for me was that it has a fail son. It has an amazing fail son performance.
Vasily Stalin, one of the 20th century's greatest fail son.
Yeah. Hall of Famer.
He was, and the thing is, it's another one where they didn't really have to stretch the truth too much.
No.
There's a story in the film that is based on reality, where he was like the Hussein brothers. He was put in charge of the Olympic hockey team, and he insisted on the team flying in adverse weather conditions, and the entire team was wiped out in a plane crash. And he tried to keep it secret and basically restock the team without anyone noticing. But yeah, he was also a huge alcoholic and
big mess, big embarrassing
total
mess.
oaf.
I think they had to keep him out of public.
Yeah,
eyes.
he was not allowed.
They had to give him things to keep him busy.
Yeah, they gave him Rubik's. The first Rubik's Cube was invented to keep Vasily Stalin busy. It was like, here, I invented this thing. He'll be in the room for hours now. We don't have to worry about him.
Yeah, but yeah, aesthetically also great. It worked very well for the style of comedy. The scene during the actual funeral procession, when they invite the clergy in as a Beria does it as an underhanded move to be seen as liberalizing, but it's totally cynical.
Yeah.
It's to get a leg up.
And they're all standing there around the coffin trying to argue
who
about
invited the bishops
without anyone telling. Michael Palin, we didn't talk about him. He plays Molotov.
Absolute treasure too.
And he really embodies sort of the way that trying to keep the party line straight in your head would basically drive you insane.
A man dedicated to internal consistency will always go mad.
Yes, and he's a character who is asked first to agree that his wife, who had been arrested shortly before the movie begins, was a traitor and deserved her fate, and then when Beria, who had not had her executed, brings her back, has to assimilate her not being guilty, having believed with all of his heart that she was guilty until the moment she showed back up in his life, and how it basically made him unable to reason after a certain point. Like he couldn't think really anymore because. Well,
one of the interesting things about this that I thought was actually quite coy, and I don't think there's any fucking politics to this. So calm down, you nerds. It's a comedy movie. It's not a left movie. It's not a right movie. It's a movie about fucking your dad. But one of the things is that you realize that the person who's trying to create a more liberal / less repressive society, the person who wants to release the prisoners, the person who gives Michael Palin his wife back in order to gain favor, like he's very much the bad guy.
Yes,
he's extremely the bad guy, and he's only doing it because it serves his own power ambitions.
Yeah.
And he's also a sadistic freak.
Yes, and that leads to a very, very, very fascinating ending where Beria, spoiler alert, but once again, come on, is arrested and very quickly tried and executed, and it's very harrowing. Like, this is a guy who has been established as a total monster, getting his comeuppance. But the scenes where he is interrogated and executed,
suddenly it is not a comedy,
are not funny, are not even cathartic, because as he's being beaten, he is pointing out that everyone who is in the process of condemning him had totally signed off on as much blood and violence as he had in terms of repressions or whatever, and there's no sense that this is righteousness so much as just another bureaucratic shuffle.
It's very intense. It's like a beautiful break from the comedy where you're like, it's like waiting for a very necessary amputation.
Yeah.
Like you just really want it to hurry up and happen.
Yeah. So yes, it's certainly not a left-wing movie. It's in the fine lib tradition of British satire.
Yeah.
So you can enjoy it on those. if you can go to a fucking Marvel movie and enjoy it, you should certainly be able to enjoy this.
You should be able to enjoy things. Yeah. It's not,
except video games.
It's about fucking your dad.
It's about fucking your dad. But yes, except video games. Don't enjoy those.
Yeah. It is a weird thing too. I think, again, as someone who recognizes the dissolution and crushing of communism, even as there are states that I would not personally like to live in as a net negative for the world. Like, it is a really good kind of snapshot to take, because you could argue that the integrity of the Soviet Union as a coherent process really did kind of have to die with Stalin. I mean, in terms of coordinating, I think at one point they had Vasily Stalin, and this is, I think, the only reference they really gave to that. I mean, you have to think of the USSR as a huge collection of totally different places. We think of it as Russians, but he starts saying, we are all orphaned cubs. We are Armenian cubs. We are Russian cubs. And he starts listing all of these like highly disparate ethnic groups and regions that I don't even know if prior to the USSR you could define them as concrete states or whatever. It's like this huge, massive, unifying project. And what do you do after that? What do you do after the guy who did that is gone?
Yeah. And
there's some unpopular policies in place. People were not pleased with the amount of repression a lot of times.
Yeah.
So, I mean, liberalization would make sense if you were a political strategist to be like, okay, let's loosen the reins a little bit.
Yeah.
So they'll have something to welcome, you know, because once he's gone, the entire country, the entire empire could theoretically be in, total chaos in the absence of Stalin. One little thing and people are like, well, Stalin's gone. I mean, people were always attempting coups and shit anyway.
Yeah. And his status as the sort of the constant thing that kept it all together, especially throughout World War II, is such, and is testified to the fact that when he died, people flooded Moscow from around the country to see him. And the movie has a fictionalized moment where the NKVD opened fire on this crowd of mourners, but in reality, hundreds of people did die in just getting crushed in massive herds of people coming to Moscow.
People wanted to see Comrade Stalin.
They needed to see him because he was sort of the one stable principle throughout their entire lives.
And you just think about it, though. It really was such a small number of people in charge of, like, the biggest country by landmass in the world.
Yeah.
A melting pot or whatever. At least as diverse as the United States of, formerly disparate states and regions. I mean, what fucking chaos. What, like, an absolutely chaotic historical moment. And it really lasted for like a year.
Yeah.
But it was still like, it was in the hands of what, like 8 to 12 people?
Yeah. And it did start the centrifugal force of sort of the edges sort of pulling away, which really did, more than anything, I think, end the Soviet Union in the 80s, and was the pull from the edges, from the nations, from the subsidiary states that started reawakening nationalism, and like in the absence of that, who knows? The Soviet Union could have survived in another form, but with those defections from the edges of it, it kind of completely lost its coherence, and you could argue that kind of started as soon as Stalin died. Yeah,
I mean, I think it was a pivotal moment. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the sort of great man theory of history or whatever, but like there are incredibly powerful personalities that do cohere moments, and Stalin was a big one. I'm not horseshoe theorying it, but like Stalin and Hitler, they were like big deals.
They were. More than you till I join you, homeboys.
Yeah, but also just like great comedy.
Yeah, it's very funny.
I can't actually remember the last time I was in a theater and like kind of consistently laughing, because things aren't funny now. They're just like mocking the cadence of comedy, and they're like, this is a joke, you will laugh, and you kind of agree to it because that's what you paid $15 to go to the theater for. But I actually had some organic laughs in this.
Yes, real organic laughs. Hydroponic indica laughs.
The real shit.
The realest herb. Okay. Well, there we go. There you go. People have been asking for more for us, Christman. Here you go. 18 months later. And we'll see you all again in about 18 months, I guess.
Yep. That's when we'll see another movie.
Yes. Until then, it's just going to be prestige television. Bye-bye, folks.
Bye.